Welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman, a podcast loaded with practical tips, powerful scripts, personal stories, and simple steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. So get ready to get the information you need to make the impact you want from someone you trust, your friend, parenting expert, Dr. Robyn Silverman.
Hello and welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything, where we give you the tips, scripts, stories, and steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. I'm so thrilled to be your host, Dr. Robyn Silverman, child and teen development specialist, author, and speaker, and most importantly, parent of two great kids who keep me loving, learning, and growing every single day, whether I want to or not. Believe me, I get it. It's not always easy, but thankfully we're in this together, and we have a lot of wonderful people to help us along the way. Now, where did you get your information and know-how regarding how to be in a successful, mutually beneficial romantic relationship when you were a teen? I know. If you're lucky, you had a knowledgeable patient mentor or parent who helped you navigate these new and exciting waters. But for most teens, books, movies, magazines, and friends were the guides and gurus, and maybe not such good ones after all. For me, I think my first education about romantic sexual relationships came from reading the book Forever by Judy Blume, and that was passed around on the field hockey bus in middle school. These days, with 24-hour access to reality TV and, yes, porn, what do our kids know about how to treat one another, love one another, respect one another in romantic relationships? Just like the need to talk to kids and teens about financial responsibility, friendship, nutrition, and stress management, we have got to talk to them about romantic relationships. And that is why we have an outstanding guest today, Dr. Richard Weissbourd. Now, Richard Weissbourd is a senior lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he directs the Human Development and Psychology program and the Kennedy School of Government. His work focuses on moral development, vulnerability, and resilience in childhood, and effective schools and services for children. He directs the Making Caring Common project, an awesome project, a national effort to make moral and social development priorities in child raising and to provide strategies to schools and parents for promoting caring in children. He is also conducting research on how older adults can better mentor young adults and teenagers in developing caring, ethical, romantic relationships. You've seen his work in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NPR. He's the author of The Vulnerable Child, named by the American School Board Journal as one of the top 10 education books of all time. His most recent book, The Parents We Mean to Be, was named by The New Yorker as one of the top 24 books of 2009. And you may have seen that just recently, it was all over the news. Dr. Weissbourd and his team released a report called The Talk: How Adults Can Promote Young, Healthy Relationships and Prevent Misogyny and Sexual Harassment. This report highlights what adults have not been doing to help prevent misogyny among teens and to prepare young people for caring, ethical, romantic, and sexual relationships. You can get all the information you need about this report and on Dr. Richard Weissbourd at makingcaringcommon.org. We are so excited to discuss this interesting and necessary topic with the fabulous Dr. Richard Weissbourd. Thank you so much for joining us on How to Talk to Kids About Anything.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, before we get into the meat of the matter, for those who haven't had the opportunity and pleasure to read your books or hear you speak, what has gotten you so interested in exploring this issue of how to talk to kids about love and how kids need to be taught how to be in a caring and ethical romantic relationship?
I think it was a few things. One is I'm a faculty member at a graduate school with a lot of people in their 20s who are, often a little bit of a mess, trying to figure this out. They're trying to figure out work and they're trying to figure out love. And, I have lots of conversations with my students over the years about their relationships. And we'll get into this, but it's a daunting, complex thing to try and figure out. Who do you want to spend the rest of your life with? How do you know when you're in love? How do you know when to make a commitment to somebody? As my kids got older, my kids are 27, 24, and 21, they were also dealing with these issues. So, so it was very personally driven in that way. I also just felt like, Freud said there are two things that are most important in life, work and love. I think one could argue that love is actually more important than work. And we do an enormous amount to prepare people for work. I mean, that's what schools are designed to do. Parents are very focused on that. We have big industries that are designed to prepare kids for work. We do really nothing to prepare them for love. So that's another sort of passion that has driven my interest in this.
So interesting. So what do you think are the main challenges that are facing young people today in developing love relationships, romantic and sexual relationships that are meaningful and caring?
Well, I think one of the things that is important to clarify is that, I think if you were to ask the general public that question, I mean, we've asked versions of that question to the general public. People think, the main challenge is the hookup culture. And people estimate that, 60-70% of kids are hooking up regularly. We've done surveys both about what people's perceptions are of the hookup culture, and we've looked at a lot of data about what the reality is about the hookup culture. And the reality is that many fewer young people are hooking up than people think. It looks like around 10% of young people are hooking up regularly. And most people guess, 60%. One of the things that we do see, though, is that all this attention to hooking up in a way has masked or, has buried a couple of problems that are much more serious. One is very high rates of misogyny and sexual harassment among high school and college students. And the other is, the number of young people who, particularly in their 20s, are anxious about whether they're going to develop a romantic relationship and our lack of preparation. We do almost nothing to prepare them. And they see an adult landscape. Many of them, almost half of them, have parents who are divorced. Many of them have grown up with parents who've been unhappily married. And it's not, they don't have role models, immediate role models. Most of them of really healthy, mature, energizing romantic relationships. So they're very understandably worried about it. And I think that's the main challenge, is how do we help them develop, meaningful, reciprocal, caring, tender, focused, generous romantic relationships.
So how can we, as parents and educators and mentors, help to prevent misogyny and harassment among teens and young adults? What are some tips or some strategies?
Well, some of this is pretty straightforward. I mean, straightforward in a sense, and some of it's very complicated. One thing very simply is that I think adults have been very passive about this, educators and parents. My students are wonderful. Many of them are former teachers, but I give this exercise to teachers when I do workshops too. It's, you're in the cafeteria and you overhear three boys talking in the cafeteria, high school juniors. And a girl walks in and the boys say, I hit that last week, or call her a slut or a hoe. And like, what do you do? And, most of my teachers who are very capable really don't know what to say, or say they wouldn't say anything, that they would be written off. And I've similarly, talked to parents who have adolescent boys, who say misogynistic or degrading things about girls, and they don't know what to say. Right. Or they're listening to song lyrics. I mean, there's a lot of misogyny in song lyrics, or on TV shows, or in film.
Right.
And again, parents often don't say anything in those situations. And so the basic tip is it's really critical to say something. That not saying something is a form of support. It's a silent form of support. We don't want to be complicit in this. Even if you're just saying that you think it's really degrading and inappropriate, I mean, just that is an important thing to say. And, if your kids respect you at one level, they can hear that. I think the other thing that this really points to is, and by the way, these degrading comments, there's sometimes boys making them about girls mostly, but there are also girls making them about girls, and there's sometimes girls making them about boys.
Sure.
So it's not just about misogyny. It's not just about boys making degrading comments to girls, about girls. But, I think it's also really important to talk to your kids about what they mean by those terms, why they're using them, why they think they're funny, why they bond with other kids through this kind of degradation. What's different from, why, a lot of kids would never say something racist, but will say something sexist. And I think that's something to, very concretely ask your kids about. Why would you not say something racist, but you feel comfortable saying something sexist? Some kids wouldn't say something homophobic, but they would say something sexist. So, these are important questions to engage your kids about. And the final thing I would say about it is I think it's also very important to be specific and concrete about how, we live in a country where there are high rates of sexual assault. 1 in 5 college-age women are reporting being sexually assaulted. And that, we can create degrading, hostile atmospheres for women that tacitly can support, can pave the way in subtle ways for much more serious forms of harm, like sexual assault. And we don't want to contribute to cultures or atmospheres that in any way permit or make easier sexual assault.
I think that's so important, that scripting, and just so that parents are really hearing that they can actually say those words and be able to make an impact, and understanding that it's not just the women in the house that should be saying these words. It's certainly the men that should be saying these words as well. That this is both parents, and if there's only women in the house, maybe you can get another man who is maybe an uncle or a friend to also get on the bandwagon here, because I think that people need to hear it from both sexes in this regard. Don't you think that that's important?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you making that point. I think you're totally right. They need to hear from both genders, and they certainly need to hear from women. They certainly need to hear from men about this. That your other point I think is very important, which is on a lot of matters around sexuality, teens are uncomfortable talking to their parents.
Yes.
But then you find, if they're too uncomfortable, if you can't I think you do have a basic responsibility to say when something is degrading, or when you feel like your child is saying something that is violating another human being, you have to say something. But in terms of more in-depth conversations, I think your point is very important, that sometimes you have to find an aunt or an uncle or some other trusted adult who can have those conversations.
Yes, I certainly feel like myself in that role as an aunt, being in that role of helping my nieces and nephews grow up to be kind and caring adults in all of those regards. Many people, I'm sure, who are listening now didn't have the kinds of conversations in school or at home with any caring adult that have anything to do with what we're talking about right now. And what I've heard from parents, it's because it's often really uncomfortable. They feel unprepared. There's a lot of fear there, that they're afraid they're going to send the message that they condone sexual behavior among young teens if they start to talk about it. I imagine schools probably think that maybe this isn't their responsibility to teach kids about love and romantic relationships. They're supposed to be doing all these other things in math and science. And what are the risks of not talking about this, and whose responsibility is it anyway?
Well, these are great questions. I would say the risk of not talking about it is, the emotional and financial costs of relationship failure are tremendous. As I said, half of marriages are ending in divorce, which has emotional costs for adults and for kids, and financial consequences, big financial consequences, often for women and their kids. Mm-hmm. But there's also, the cost of depression, the cost of domestic violence, the cost of substance abuse, alcoholism. Many kinds of problems are the result of relationship failure. So it seems like this is something that as adults, we really do have to take on in some way. Mm-hmm. And that these conversations are difficult. And that everybody has to do it. Parents have to do it, and educators have to do it. It shouldn't be, either or. And, because these are big, complex hard things to do that we're all struggling with. I'm not saying that in terms of education that, I'm very aware of how stressed people in schools are and how packed their agenda is. But I also think, in a sex ed class or in an English class, there are great opportunities to talk about love and romantic relationships and healthy relationships. Mm-hmm. And it's really important to do that. And a lot of sex ed now is it's either abstinence only or it's disaster prevention.
Right.
It's how not to get pregnant or how not to get STDs. Mm-hmm. It's not how do you develop a caring, ethical, respectful relationship with somebody else. And one of the things we see in our data is that kids really want to have those conversations, lots of them. That's really where their worries are. That's really where their hopes are. And this is a great way of meeting kids where they are. And I guess I would say one other thing about it in terms of schools, which is, the fights about sex ed in this country have been ferocious about what you can teach, what you can't teach. I actually think we could reach a lot of agreement about respect and care in romantic relationships.
So, it sounds to me like what you found is that young people really aren't prepared for romantic love. So if they're not, what are some specific ways that our listeners, our parents, educators, mentors can specifically prepare them for a caring, loving relationship?
Well, let me just sort of answer that, two ways. One is that I do think there are opportunities all the time to engage our kids about different aspects of healthy, gratifying romantic relationships and sexual relationships. And just to tell you a very quick story, my daughter gave me permission to tell you this.
Oh, I love this. Thank you, daughter.
Yeah. So when she's 21 now, when she was about 14 or 15, we used to watch Grey's Anatomy together. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've ever watched Grey's Anatomy, but, little Grey is going, I can't remember whether it's McDreamy or McSteamy, but I think she's going out with McSteamy, and little Grey's probably in her late 20s. McSteamy is probably in his late 30s. And she comes to his apartment, and I'm watching the show with the daughter, and she says to him, "You need to teach me." And she means like, you need to teach me how to have gratifying sex. Mm-hmm. And she's sexually experienced. I just think this is a bizarre situation, bizarre, strange and disturbing thing to say to me. And I said to my daughter, it's really important to me that you understand that you're going to have to teach. There's a lot you have to teach men about sex, mm-hmm. And you really have to be, you have to take charge here and really take responsibility. And she said to me, "If you ever say anything like that to me again, I'll never speak to you." And and we laughed, and she walked out of the room.
That didn't go exactly as planned.
But I have to say, I do not regret that I said it. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of the places that parents get stuck, is that it's not like our kids are going to, say, "Oh, I'm so grateful to you for saying that to me." I mean, these are hard conversations. They're awkward conversations. Mm-hmm. But they're conversations we need to have. And, and this does not often happen in parenting, but, my daughter said to me recently, and again, she's 21, that, she thought I was clumsy about it sometimes, but she got that I was really about her having authority and being an equal in her relationships with men. And that was and she said, I really appreciate you did that.
Wow, that feels good.
That doesn't happen that often. And she didn't remember this specific episode as well as I did. Mm-hmm. But the point, being that, there are times where we just have to plow through, and it's important to say, even if our kids can't register at the moment, I think, they often do register it in some deeper way, and it can affect them.
If you can imagine a teenage boy is sitting with his parent, maybe he's in the backseat of the car and, driving along, or I don't know, they're walking somewhere, and the parent is there with the child, and they've listened to, this parent has listened to what you're saying. What would you want specifically for a parent to say to a teenage boy to help prepare that particular teen for an ethical, loving, romantic relationship based on respect and care? What kind of things would you want them to convey to that boy?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think there are three or four things that I would really want to highlight. One of them is that, one of the things that we see in our data is that a lot of parents aren't having conversations with their kids about basic things, about like what consent is, what harassment is. And you got to have a conversation with your child about what sexual consent means, what harassment means, what basic respect means in a relationship. That a lot of kids don't know that you shouldn't catcall a woman, for example. I mean, that, a lot of women find that offensive and frightening, and you got to have those conversations. A lot of men don't know what consent means in a relationship. That it's not just a matter, if a woman doesn't physically fight back, that doesn't mean that she's giving you consent. And there are basic things like that you really got to convey to men and to boys. That, again, in our data, there are a lot of parents who aren't having those conversations. I think the other thing that, a message that you want to convey, two more messages specifically. One is that, this is sort of a Martin Luther King quote, like, you can't be who you ought to be unless your partner is who she or he ought to be. That you really want to have a relationship of care and respect because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's going to elevate you and elevate the relationship. And that's what the real challenging thing is. The challenging thing is not, to divide girls into good girls or bad girls, or good girls or sluts, or to degrade girls, or to brag about your conquests. That's all kind of pathetic. And you want to do something hard and challenging and courageous and tough. Figure out how to have a deep reciprocal romantic relationship with someone. That's a much harder thing to do, a much more important thing to do. The third thing I would just say is that, we are all, when we start a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship, we are like wading into a riptide of feeling. I mean, these very powerful cross currents of feeling. We might have a lot of anxiety, we might have shame, we might have frustration, we might have anger. I mean, sexuality and love clearly bring out these profound and intense feelings. And, I think the other message that I would convey is that it's really important when you have those feelings to learn how to manage them, to talk to me as a parent about them if you're having difficulties managing them, or to talk to a friend, or to talk to an uncle or an aunt or something. If you're finding yourself really anxious or frustrated or angry or, whatever those feelings are, that this is very difficult terrain and where a lot of people struggle. It's normal, and sometimes you need help.
So if we flip this, and now we're sitting in front of a daughter, what kind of messages would be the same, and what might be different that you would want to add to the conversation?
So, I think some of the messages, I think your point is right, that some of the messages are the same. That, it is wrong, as we were talking about, I think it's wrong to assume that it's only men degrading or manipulating girls. One of the things that my women students have said when I have talked about misogyny is that, and some of the men too, they said, I don't think you realize, how much women can be manipulative and degrading to men and to each other. And there's a lot of, in the context of romantic and sexual relationships, women undermining each other. And so, I think some of the messages around respect and care and not manipulating and not leading men on, I think not just liking a man because he's the captain of the football team or has high status. Um, you know, those are important conversations to have with girls too. And I'm obviously not, I don't think the big problem here is girls or women leading men on. I think that the big problem is misogyny. But there are forms of manipulation that are very important to talk to girls about. I think the other thing is that girls are, the more girls are succeeding in work and more they're outperforming boys at school, the more subordinate it appears they are in their romantic and sexual relationships. I mean, more, relationships are for them are about servicing males and subordinate and being subordinate, and the more prey they are to misogyny. So the issues around self-respect for girls and self-assertion and solidarity with other girls, like you're not in this alone, you're with your sisters, and you got it. And the importance of not undermining each other. I mean, I think those are messages for girls that are very important.
Okay.
And different from some of the messages that you would send to boys.
Right. Okay. Yes. And I would imagine that, if a parent doesn't feel that their relationship that they've had in the past has been very loving and caring, it's important to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And also the times when you feel like you have had positive relationships. So telling your stories, and if you can, provide a good model for these kids would be really important. But I'm just wondering, for those parents who have had a really disruptive relationship with somebody else, maybe even in front of their teen, how can they deal with that and still send a positive message to their kids?
So I think there's another great question. I think you're totally right that a lot of parents do feel hobbled or disabled in these conversations because they feel like they failed in their own relationships.
Right.
And the truth is that, relationship failures can generate, in my mind, as much wisdom as relationship successes.
Bingo.
You just have to, whether you're in a successful relationship or whether you've had a rocky time with relationships, you just have to do the work. I mean, you sort of have to distill the lessons, boil down the lessons you've learned, really reflect about, what you learned about what can go right and what can go wrong in a relationship and why, what you may have missed and what kind of messages that what kind of messages you think are important to convey to your kids. So your kids don't make some of the mistakes that you did, or don't get caught up in some of the destructive relationship patterns that you might have had.
Right.
Like we all, part of the simple guideline here, guidepost is, I'm really wanting us to talk about this more.
Yes.
I'm wanting parents to think about this more, and I'm wanting parents to talk to each other more.
I love that. I think that's really important. And I'm wondering if you're going to say that's your top tip, but it is top tip time. If you would want parents to come away with one thing, one piece of advice that they could take from this podcast, what would you say is the top tip you'd want them to come away with?
Well, I think the top tip is that we are backing away from this topic, and we're very skittish about both romance and about sexuality. And we really have to find a way to engage it, that it's so critical. We're seeing, so many romantic and sexual problems among our kids, and we really have to become more thoughtful about it, more engaged with it, find constructive ways to talk to young people about it. And part of that is beginning the conversation with each other and, not wringing our hands about the hookup culture. Which is concerning in some ways, but getting focused on this other question, which is, what do we really understand about healthy love, healthy romantic and sexual relationships, and how do we pass on that wisdom to our kids?
Right. Start the conversation, even if you have to fumble through a little bit.
Fumble through. I think we don't need to feel like we have all the answers. Right. I just think that this is, we'll learn a lot too. I mean, I think, we should go into these conversations with some insights, but we do not need to have all the answers. And these can be wonderful conversations with our kids.
Thank you. So here's the resource of the week. We want to just find out where people can get more information about you and your incredible new study and any of your books. So where can we send people?
Well, our report is coming out on May 15th. I think
May 15th. Okay.
I had told you May 1st, and it's gotten delayed a couple of weeks. So it's coming out on May 15th. But at makingcaringcommon.org, the report and a number of resources around, many resources around engaging your kids in conversations about romance and sexuality, healthy relationships and sexuality will be up on our website.
Terrific. Well, Dr. Richard Weissbourd, thank you so very much for joining us today and talking to us about how we can really be a solution to our teens, how we can teach them about love and ethical romantic relationships instead of leaving it up to chance. You have provided us with really important information about a topic that I think parents can feel a little stressed out over, feel like they don't have so much control over. But actually, it turns out that you gave them some good tips and scripts, and maybe we have more control and more influence than we think we might have already had in the past. So that feels really good, and I want to thank you for that.
You bet. No, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I'm cheering for you. I think this is a great topic you're taking on. I think the topics you take on are great.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I just love what you said about really just get in there and have the conversation. Even if you feel awkward, we've got to have the conversation. And if not you, how about somebody else in your family who can be a point person, a mentor? I think those are all really good tips. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure the listeners are all very excited to hear all the things you've had to say today.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
I've got my takeaways, and sweet friends, I hope you have yours. Let's discuss them. Come up on Facebook. Let's go to facebook.com/Dr. Robyn Silverman, or let's chat about it at drrobynsilverman.com or twitter.com/Dr. Robyn. And if you love this podcast like I did, would you kindly go up to iTunes and rate and review it so others can find out all about it as well and listen to these incredible solutions? I truly appreciate it. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com. I look forward to weathering the storms and enjoying the sunny side of life together. And please remember, even when it seems like nothing is going right, and we all have those days, you've got this, you're here, you're getting the information you need, and on the days we fall short, and we all have them, never forget there's always tomorrow. Failure is normal. Try again. Parenting is the ultimate do-over. I get it. And as there are moments when we all doubt our know-how, our choices, and our sweet sanity, please know you are 10 times the parent you think you are. Until next time, this is Dr. Robyn Silverman with How to Talk to Kids About Anything. Please tune in again and keep connecting through conversation. See you next week.
You've been listening to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com.